Okay, so in this video, we're going to continue telling the story of the early Islamic Caliphate. So where we left off yesterday, the Umayyad Caliphate killed Hussein, who was Muhammad's grandson. So they killed Hussein, Muhammad's grandson, who was leading a rebellion against the Umayyads. Not surprisingly, the fact that the Umayyads killed Muhammad's grandson led to a lot of other rebellions. And so this led to other rebellions, which eventually toppled the Umayyad Caliphate. And that happened in the year 750. One of these groups starts the next caliphate, and this caliphate is known as the Abbasid Caliphate. And the Abbasid Caliphate is going to last for a really long time, from 750 to 1258. So for about over 500 years, the Abbasid Caliphate is going to be the center of the Islamic world. Now, these guys are Sunni Muslims. The Shia Muslims, the ones that supported Hussein and believed that the caliph should be a descendant of Muhammad, the Shia are going to mostly be a majority in Persia, which we'll come to later in the course. So we'll come back to Persia later. But for right now, the Abbasid Caliphate is the one in charge. So these are Sunni Muslims, and they're going to move the capital to Baghdad, which is now the capital of Iraq. The Abbasids are also going to go and kind of hunt down and eliminate the rest of the Umayyads, so they don't provide any sort of rebellion for them. So there aren't any more Umayyads after the Abbasids come to power. Now, this ruthless aggression aside, the Abbasids actually run the caliphate in a very kind of thoughtful way. And they're going to borrow a lot of Persian administrative techniques. So the Abbasids are going to run things in a very normal way. The way that all of the other successful empires we've looked at, the Abbasids are going to run things in a similar way. So they're going to kind of have a centralized government with regional governors. They're going to allow religious and linguistic tolerance. Now, the religious tolerance comes with that jizya, so the tax on non-Muslims. So you are absolutely free to practice whatever religion you'd like, but if you choose a religion that is not Islam, then you have to pay a tax. And so this tax on non-Muslims is a non-violent incentive to get people to convert. And in that way also kind of provide a sense of religious unity. They're going to kind of foster economic innovation and a lot of trade. So what we're seeing is kind of a lot of similarities between successful governments. The Abbasid Caliphate, the Tang and Song dynasties, the Roman Empire at its height, the Han dynasty at its height, all of them are doing these things. Now, this period of time of the Abbasid Caliphate is known as the Golden Age of Islam. So this period of time is known as the Golden Age of Islam. And its strength is in its willingness to adopt new and foreign ideas. And this may go back to the ideas of the Bedouins who, living in the desert and having to survive on whatever they could find. Maybe that idea is incorporated here. The idea that if it's a good idea, we should be using it. It doesn't matter if it's our idea or not. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. So we're going to see the Muslims adopt a lot of new ideas, and that's going to lead to their success. So, for instance, they bring in a lot of new crops. A lot of these crops are coming from South Asia, so from India, Southeast Asia, or China, and they're coming through trade. So the idea that they are fostering these trade routes, they're protecting the trade routes, the same way that the Chinese did, the same way that the Romans did. These guys are protecting the trade routes, and they're bringing in these new crops. We're going to see the same kind of process take place in the Abbasid Caliphate as we saw in China. So these new crops are going to increase the population, which is also going to increase the number of people living in cities. And it's also going to lead to an increase in specialized labor, which will lead to an increase in innovation and invention. So the same process that we see in China because of the Vietnamese fast ripening rice, we see the same thing happen in the Abbasid Caliphate. So we're going to see a big rise in urbanization. We're going to see a big rise in specialized labor and invention and innovation. For the same reason, the same process is happening in the Abbasid Caliphate. So, for instance, what kinds of innovation are we talking about? We're going to see them domesticate the camel, which allows for increased trade through the desert. Which will finally help link sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and Europe. They're going to develop these things called lateen sails, which are like sailboat sails. They're triangular sails that can move to catch the wind. But they're also going to develop things that are just better versions of things that had already been developed. So they're going to make very good fabrics. And they're going to especially be famous for their rugs. And especially when we think about rugs, Islamic art is focused on like designs and patterns. So the rugs that are made by Islamic rug makers or Islamic fabric makers are very intricate. They have very intricate designs because Islamic art is focused on these kinds of designs and patterns, not depictions of people. So it's rare to find Islamic art with people in them. Most of their artwork is design based. So you'll see patterns, mosaics, calligraphy, but you're not going to see a lot of depictions of people. Additionally, when we think about the cities, let's take a closer look at the cities of the Golden Age of Islam. So these cities became kind of centers of trade, of course, but they also became centers of education as well. Education was a big part of Islamic culture. And so the cities had lots of schools and universities. These schools were called madrasas. And in these centers of education, Muslim scholars read texts from all over Eurasia. So the trade routes that kind of crisscrossed through the Middle East brought text from all over. So they're reading Chinese books, they're reading Greek and Roman philosophy, they're reading Indian religious texts. So all of this stuff is being read and maintained in Islamic libraries and schools. The biggest one of these is the House of Wisdom, which was in Baghdad. So when the Crusades happen and European soldiers go to the Middle East, they're going to find all of this stuff that had largely either been unknown in Europe or forgotten about in Europe, and they're going to bring these ideas back to Europe, and it's going to eventually spark things like the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, but that's still way off in the distance. Remember that the strength of Islam is its willingness to adopt new foreign ideas. And a lot of these things are coming from foreign places, and they're not Islamic ideas. They're coming from other places. So, for instance, they're also going to adopt things like the compass or the astrolabe to help them navigate. So these are navigational technologies. So the compass, of course, is Chinese. The astrolabe is Greek. So with the Abbasid Caliphate kind of being in the middle between the Chinese and Eastern Europe, it's not weird to think that they're going to encounter both of these technologies and then use them. They're also going to encounter Indian numerals. And when we think about what Indian numerals are, those are the ones we use. 1, 2, 3, and so on. But we call these numbers Arabic numerals. We call them Arabic numerals. So we call them Arabic because the Europeans who encountered them first saw them used by the Arabs in the Abbasid Caliphate. So even though they are Indian by origin, the people that brought them to our attention in the United States and then in Europe saw them first here, and that's why they're called Arabic numerals. I think that's a good place to stop. I think this kind of gives you a sense of what the golden age of Islam is. So until the next video, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.